Thanks for being here today. Hello. I'm Roy Shamir, one of the chairpersons for the Audio Engineering New York Society. We're pleased to co-host this event with the Society of Broadcast Engineers, 15 New York. Our topic is the AES Technical Document 1009, and our moderator and panelist, David Bialik, will introduce us to our prestigious panelists. Please stay tuned for other events AES New York session has planned in the upcoming months. And without further delay, David Bialik.
First, I want to thank Roy for helping put this all together, and Bud Williamson of the Society of Broadcast Engineers. This is a joint presentation sponsored by the New York section of the AES and Chapter 15 of the Society of Broadcast Engineers. So thank you both. And just to clear up a little business first, next Thursday, the SBE Chapter 15 meeting will be at 6 p.m., and it's going to be on single frequency networks for FM broadcast, and it'll be presented by Bert Goldman, who I think was just named NAB Engineer of the Year or something like that. Details will be put on sbe15.com. So I highly recommend everyone attend. So that gets that out of the way. I am one of the co-chairs of the Audio Engineers Society's Technical Committee for Broadcast and Online Delivery, along with my other co-chairs, Kimio Hamasaki, Matthew Parmentier, Jim Starzynski, and myself. We try to work on audio issues for broadcast. And if anyone ever has any questions or comments you'd like to make to us, feel free to email broadcast@aes.org. Now, our working committee for Dialogue Intelligibility, it was a large committee, as you can see on the board here. And we had meetings, I'd say almost every week, working on this for over a year. And this was brought to us by Jim Starzynski of NBC, and who originally brought up the topic, and him and Bob Katz pushed it through that we should look at it. I first want to introduce the speakers that we're going to have. We have Robert Bleidt from streamcrest.com, Richard Friedel, retired from Fox Television, Scott Kramer of Greenfield Sound, and Scott Norcross of Dolby. And these weren't the only people, but they were heavy hitters. And now I want to introduce Jim Starzynski, who's going to talk about how the paper got together.
All right. Thank you, David. And I hope everyone can hear me okay. Yes?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, great. So really nice to be here. Thanks everyone for joining. And my appreciation, of course, to all our members that gave and volunteered so much of their time to put our paper together. Just to kind of continue on with what David was saying, we started the project, as you'll see here, and we have an interesting story that's both practical and timely. And even though we did kick it off, if you see in the slide here, in the summer of 2023, the topic is just as important right now as it was then, and in fact, maybe more. So I want to talk a little bit about how all this happened. At that time period in 2023, you'll see from the slide here, we have Jane Pauley from CBS Sunday Morning. The AES was contacted by CBS Sunday Morning staff while they were doing their research on a prospective story they were going to do on dialogue intelligibility, but based around why people are turning closed captions on so much. So when that information got to the AES, and I believe it got to our member, Bob Katz first, he was getting together with some of us that had worked on some papers with him and started to talk about the topic. So this was something that resonated with me. At NBC, we were getting a lot of feedback generally about dialogue intelligibility on shows. We know it happens with several of the networks and a lot of the presentations and a lot of the programming that we deal with. And I thought it would be really good to dive into the topic, considering it looked like there was some momentum building around. So in 2023, we took a look at all of the expertise that we had available to us, having worked in other projects in the AES, and thought about some subject matter experts that would be able to work on this with us. So we came up with a subject matter expert on hearing, another on content creation, TV set sound design, and a bunch of us contributed to another section in the paper around distribution, which included pieces on loudness and coding and also audio processing. So all of this work was coming together over the course of the time when it initiated in the summer of 2023 when I assembled the group. And then CBS Sunday Morning finally did come out with their, and I highly encourage you to look at it, their piece, which was led by David Pogue, in March of 2024. If you go to the URL here or search it out on the web, you'll be able to find it. It's really interesting. We worked through all that time period, and after about 30 months, which is a significant amount of time that we did work on this, 30 months, so more than 2 years, working in the beginning sections about every other week, and then every week, we had quite a bit of effort and momentum building around this, and certainly some terrific subject matter expertise. So I highly encourage you to look at the paper. A lot of great information, a lot of great work put into it, very timely, very accurate, very enlightening. So I want to move on to our presenters, and I'd like to introduce the next colleague of ours that will be coming up to talk about different portions of the paper. Scott Kramer, formerly of Netflix, and now with Greenfield Sound, will cover the dialogue intelligibility ecosystem and a whole bunch more. Scott, please take it from here.
Thanks, Jim. So the dialogue intelligibility issue is very big, and I think one of the paper's main goals was to explain the size of it across the ecosystem, across the creation, delivery, and distribution chain to endpoints in the home. But what it results in is viewer strain and disengagement. It means less people watching the programs and less people getting enjoyment out of streaming services or broadcasters because they can't understand. We do see up to 30% or more of subtitle use in the home, including same language subtitles. So I'm listening in English and I have English subtitles on, for example. The expanded dynamic range that we can now do in mixes following the transition to fully digital signal chains. And that massive cinematic dynamic range can compromise the clarity of the dialogue. So this is a very complex and it's a nuanced issue. It's across the entire creation chain. It's from before the actor even speaks into the microphone all the way to the transducer in a listener's home. And so this is thus a shared responsibility across that entire chain. This graphic both gives you a sense of where the paper goes and what it covers, and also the enormity of the problem, and how we can't fix the problem of dialogue intelligibility in one place or one modality across this large ecosystem. It begins with casting and talent, and it begins with the performance style, where in the kind of old Hollywood days, it was very traditional to have a big stage style, performance style where the actors were clearly enunciating and projecting their voice. And now it's become increasingly common to have very understated naturalistic performances. So it begins from casting, script, and actors, and the subject matter of the script itself, into the kind of areas we're more familiar with: dialogue recording, how the voices are captured on set, what is compromising that or causing masking on the set before the recording. And then in the dialogue edit and the pre-mixing, there's a kind of a common issue where the teams working on films are so familiar with the script that they almost take intelligibility for granted. And broadcast mixers have to kind of force themselves to challenge their own listening and their familiarity with the content and remind themselves and mix for the kind of lowest common denominator home environment. Broadcast mixers can be very talented at that. And it can be a bit more of a challenge for film mixers who are used to the mixing for a kind of pristine venue of a theatrical environment. But that cinematic mixing style has come to premium content. It began back when I was working on one of the seasons of The Sopranos, and we were talking about mixing it like a film and not a TV show. And I'm not sure that was always the right idea because it resulted in these extreme dynamic range mixes. And so that cinematic mixing style has contributed to the issue, along with extremely capable processing plugins and tools within our audio workstations that enable us to fix issues or overprocess and actually contribute to problems with intelligibility. You have to, use these things very carefully in the modern age. We also mix traditionally in significant cinema style rooms, which are not like a living room. And this is another one of those places where the mixer has to be enlightened to remember that they're mixing in a more pristine environment than the content will be consumed in. Then on the distribution side, we have loudness normalization, dynamic range on encode, dynamic range control on encode, down mixes from sophisticated Atmos and multi-channel mixes down to stereo, where there can be a lot of buildup of content. And all of these systems in the distribution platform that must be very carefully set up and calibrated by the distributor. Then we have the whole area of the consumer, where a lot of us professionals are less comfortable and less at ease, and the consumer ecosystem is very complicated. There's particular implementations of standards and non-standard implementations across devices. We can have downmix issues. We can have features added with great intent to help sell TVs that actually can compromise the dialogue or cause some of these issues. If a TV, for example, adds spatialization technology, but it doesn't sufficiently look out for the quality of the center channel dialogue, then it can actually add this enhancement that contributes to the problem. Of course, there's always been very poor speakers in many of these devices, and I knew from my work at Netflix that overwhelmingly the audience listens with built-in speakers and does not wear headphones. Although the proliferation of soundbars has been very nice in the living room to help improve dialogue intelligibility. So there's these different cross currents, compromising or enhancing intelligibility at home. The listening room, the room acoustics of the average living room across the world, whether it's a mobile first country or a living room culture of consumption of content, what ambient noise is happening in the listener's environment, the dishwasher, the traffic outside, the dogs running around the house and the kids yelling in the background, and then those other kind of compromises that come from the listening environment. And then it comes to the listener itself and their inherent hearing ability. And another presenter will go deeply into that in today's talk. Their ability to recognize speech and understand content, their ability to discern language, their ability to discern the context of the scenes that contribute to intelligibility, and their ability to overcome the masking problems either from the set or in their environment. It all adds up to the listening effort required and their ability to comprehend the story. The data always shows that when the viewers are unable to follow the story, they are going to disengage most commonly. So at this point, I believe I'm moving on and handing it off to Scott Norcross to talk about the hearing ability on the next slide.
Yes, thank you, Scott. So the paper also has a section on human hearing, highlighting aspects that affect intelligibility. So I'm going to go over a few of that in the next two slides. The first thing I want to briefly mention is intelligibility versus listening effort. So you would have heard Scott mention about listening effort. And we always say intelligibility. Strictly speaking, dialogue intelligibility is the percentage of a message or the dialogue a person can understand. So it's usually on a scale between 0 and 100%. But it doesn't take into account how difficult the dialogue is to understand. And that's a key aspect of this. And that's what's referred to as listening effort. So if somebody can still understand or the dialogue is still intelligible, but is straining to understand it, that can be fatiguing. So, and this relates to the concept of bottom up and top down processing, where we refer to bottom up processing as just the subconscious understanding of the tech of the speech or the dialogue, like decoding the acoustic cues of the spoken word. Um, Whereas top-down processing refers to that dialogue in the context of a sentence or what one is understanding of the spoken text. So when the cues are degraded, meaning there could be masking or there's background noise in the speech, listeners rely more on top-down processing, and that increases the fatigue and the strain of listening and frustration. Next slide. So a few other aspects that are touched on in the document are masking, and this is most people are aware of masking. That gets exploited in like lossy codecs. But it also has an impact on intelligibility. And I think Scott mentioned around the aspects of down mixing. So you could have, in a general mix, you could just have sound effects or even environmental noise in the listening room, in your listening environment can impact the masking effect. But also when you start down mixing, you tend to get build up, and the masking of those other sounds in those limited channels can have an impact. One thing to remember is that heavy bass can actually mask upwards, so mask higher frequencies, such as dialogue. Another aspect that's touched on is reverberation, and that can be related to the mix in terms of if the dialogue is in a more reverberant environment. But typically, it's more impactful on the listener's environment as opposed where the mix may be done in a more controlled studio with shorter reverb times, but it may actually be listened in the consumer's living room, which is potentially a lot more reverberant. And in general, it's individual listener characteristics that if impact intelligibility. So there's hearing loss, there's age. Younger children tend to not use top-down processing as readily as older people. There's also the whole issue of non-native speakers. So more and more um, content that we consume may not be in the language that is our first language. So it really depends on the demographic of the audience and the listening environment. And to kind of sum that up is that a simple intelligibility metric is probably insufficient to address all the concerns and factors dealing with intelligibility. So next slide, and I think I pass it back to Scott.
Yeah, I'm going to cover here production and post-production affecting intelligibility. So earlier in the ecosystem, and it's those subdued acting styles that I mentioned in the overview. Cinematic mix is not entirely appropriate for home viewing. Misunderstanding or misapplication of loudness recommendations can be a common issue. I recall 25 years ago at Tadeo hearing mixers discuss and kind of argue over their methods for making sure they hit the loudness spec and how they would adjust the room level or do these kind of intuitive things in order to hit the specs when it wasn't always necessary. And often it's in an attempt to avoid post-mix loudness correction, which is not usually recommended. Loudness range targets and how LRA can change unpredictably should not be used in a specification and is very difficult to calculate reliably. Then again, misuse of dialogue processing tools where these advanced multi-band denoisers are so helpful to denoise, but when overused will compromise the core envelope of speech itself. And so too, the machine learning algorithms that are common to broadband noise reduction can be over applied and over processed and create artifacts that are audible from the filters within them and in their DSP and cause compromises. So, it's always important to process just enough to reduce noise, but not over process. And we don't, we have dialogue editors that will contribute to that, but not always achieve the goal of the mixer on the stage. I believe I'm moving back to, oh, this is for me too. This is the distribution device, inconsistent loudness management across the distribution chain can be an issue, and then down mixing challenges where all of that wonderful immersive mix is folded down to stereo and has to be done so very carefully to avoid buildup from the surround field and overheads, challenging the most critical center channel and left-right sound from the track. So down mixing, of course, is an art form in and of itself. But there's often not a budget for an additional custom stereo mix for a TV or film. So the mixer has to switch into stereo and make sure there's no compromise there to the dialogue. And the next slide, I am now passing it back to Scott, I believe, for this target level dialogue boost and dynamic range control. And I should say that Scott has been very heavily involved in standards communities and has done a lot of pioneering work at Dolby for decades. And missed that in my intro.
Oh, no worries. Thank you, Scott. So this diagram, there's a lot here, but it's to kind of illustrate the effects of target level, dialogue boost, and dynamic range control, as the title says. And these can be applied either at the distribution level or at playback, depending on the delivery codec. So in the figure here, if you go to the start of it's on the left here, the vertical scale is loudness. And the first scenario here is the original mix. So if you have the original mix here, the darker blue represents the dialogue. The lighter blue here is the music and effects. So it's more dynamic than the dialogue. The solid dark lines here indicate like the average dialogue level and maybe the music and effects level. But below this here, we have this environmental noise or background noise, say. So in this original playback scenario, somebody's listening to it's a fairly dynamic mix, but one can see that, well, maybe there's background noise in here. So what can we do to improve intelligibility? So the obvious thing is, well, you can boost up the dialogue here. So if you go over to the next scenario here is you're just boosting up the dialogue. That helps with the dialogue, but well, you still have a signal, maybe some of the dialogue, but say maybe some of the music and effects may still be masked by the background or environmental noise. So the other concept that happens, and this is typically more on mobile devices, is the media, the content is actually output at a higher target level. So it's decoded here, maybe not at -24, it actually maybe say at -16 here. So in this is the original mix here, and all that's happening is you're just outputting it at a higher target level. This is overcoming the background noise just from the brute force of outputting at a louder level. But as I mentioned, this is more common on mobile devices. They may not have the full dynamic range capabilities as a home theater or a television set, or you may want to have a reduced dynamic range to bring out everything above the background noise. So some DRC can be applied, and you can see here the bars are constrained, so there's limited, you're limiting the dynamic range. Everything is out above the background noise level here. So that's one way of potentially increasing the or improving intelligibility while maintaining basically the same dialogue to non-dialogue mix ratio in here. Then the far right is kind of combining them all together. So in the extreme case where there's background noise, you're limited dynamic range, and maybe the mix isn't the best with respect to dialogue intelligibility, you could do a dialogue boost, DRC, constraining the extremes of the signal, and also outputting at a higher loudness target level. So this is just illustrating these different solutions that happen. And I'm going to pass it over to Robert, who's actually going to demonstrate those, and that should all be working. Robert?
Thank you, Scott. So we have a demonstration prepared for you. These are excerpts from a science fiction drama that was mixed by John Greasley, and we thank him for providing those to us for demonstration. In the demonstration that I will now present, I'm going to show several techniques that you can use after mixing once you're in distribution, or maybe even in the playback device, to improve intelligibility. So I'll be playing for you the original mix as it would be prepared for distribution, applying dynamic range control as you might have with traditional audio codecs like AC3, a stronger dynamic range control that you would have, say, with AC4 or MPEG-H, machine separated and boosted dialogue, and then everything. And so in the extreme case, if you really can't hear the dialogue, we'll just throw everything at it. In order to make this more obvious on a Zoom webcast, I'm going to play some airport ambience background noise. So it will be a little harder to understand because I'm simulating you being in a noisy environment. And then at the end, I'll have a few comments about some new technology, which is an intelligibility meter. So I now need to stop the share and switch over to a computer where we've got the Nuendo workstation up and loaded. And here, this should get the job done. Splendid, there we are. So let me explain one little thing about Nuendo. It has this feature where if you highlight a track, it can solo that track. So that's what I'm doing. As I highlight these, that track will be soloed. And you can also see that soloing's been disabled for this ambience track, so it's going to play all the time. And I have two scenes for you. Let me intro the first scene, playing for you the original mix. And you'll probably hear some like room tone on this mix as well, because it's set on a spaceship, and they've got spaceship background tone as well. Let's see if I can get it to click here.
You follow every one of Kelly's orders to the letter, or she's authorized to shoot you. Got it?
Just stay on my good side, maybe fine.
So that was the original, and you may have noticed with the female actor, there was a little trouble understanding her because her voice trailed off towards the end. We're going to fix that. So let's try applying regular DRC, which you would have as night mode or midnight mode on your AVR at home. And I'll just zoom in on her dialogue so we can save some time.
Just stay on my good side, maybe fine.
Here's the same thing with a stronger DRC.
Just stay on my good side, maybe fine.
Machine boosted dialogue.
Just stay on my good side, maybe fine.
And then everything.
Just stay on my good side, maybe fine.
So by the end there, you could probably tell she was calling him a hun. Don't know if that's pertinent to the story or not. Now we'll try listening to a different, more dramatic scene. This is like a spaceship battle. You may want to turn down your volume a little bit.
Alert the fleet and notify the Chancellor. Assume battle formation.
So that was with everything. I forgot to cue up the original mix again. Let me do that, and I will just play for you the dialogue.
Alert the fleet and notify the Chancellor. Assume battle formation.
So that's the original. Let's try adding traditional DRC.
Alert the fleet and notify the Chancellor. Assume battle formation.
Some stronger dynamic range control.
Alert the fleet and notify the Chancellor. Assume battle formation.
Machine boosted dialogue.
Alert the fleet and notify the Chancellor. Assume battle formation.
And once again, everything.
Alert the fleet and notify the Chancellor. Assume battle formation.
Then back to the original for comparison.
Alert the fleet and notify the Chancellor. Assume battle formation.
So, just finding the stop sharing button. So as you can see, using some of these techniques can improve intelligibility. Basically, we're bringing up the dialogue above the level of the music and effects and maybe giving you a little more range on the volume control. And I am now going to talk a little bit about what we need to think about in terms of the home listening environment, because this is important when we do mixes or checking for dialogue intelligibility. Studies over the years have shown that consumers listen at much lower levels than we do as professionals when we're mixing. Typically, a consumer listening level might be 58 or 60 dBA. Further, the reverberation time of consumers' listening rooms is going to be a lot higher than you would have in a dry, near-field mix room when you're doing a mix. And the consumers are going to play background noise sources. You know, they may have their furnace blower on, they're running the dishwasher or the clothes dryer, there are people in the background talking. So there's more masking noise to interfere with understanding the dialogue. And their playback systems don't have as much range as we typically have on a dubbing stage or mix room. So there's a limit to how far they can turn the knob up. For this reason, when we're checking for dialogue intelligibility, we want to monitor at consumer levels, like 60 dBA or so, and add in some masking noise, maybe 35 or 40 dBA. When we go to distribution, we want to make sure that we've got dynamic range control gain sequences turned on in the encoder so that this can be used during playback. The other thing is, most of our audience, maybe 90%, is going to be listening to stereo from the speakers in their TV set, which are typically much smaller than these speakers. These are from a good TV. And unless the streaming distributor, in the rare case, offers a dedicated stereo mix that was made by a mixer, you'll hear an automatic down mix that's done by the audio decoder in the TV. So for this reason, we want to listen to the stereo down mix from the audio decoder, and we want to do that using small loudspeakers so that we approximate the postage stamp speakers that are in the TV set itself. And one discussion that we had when we were writing up this report is we said, you know, what can we advise consumers to do? What should we do? And our neighbors say, hey, I can't hear the dialogue. One of the main recommendations that we came up with is to buy a soundbar, and if possible, spend a few extra dollars on a soundbar that has a center channel speaker. This assumes, of course, that you don't have an AVR at home. Another thing to do is to try using the DRC settings on your TV soundbar or AVR, probably labeled night mode or midnight mode. This will help avoid you turning down the volume on the very loud scenes and then forgetting to turn it up to hear the quiet dialogue. Post-processing systems that are built into TVs to, quote, improve intelligibility may help or may hurt the dialogue, so you'll have to experiment with those. Should your device have automatic EQ set up, like Odyssey or Dirac built in, then by all means use that so that you have flat playback response in your TV. It's possible that your content provider might offer other mixes. We can do that on streaming. And for example, Amazon Prime Video offers a boosted dialogue mix. This, of course, will vary depending on which provider is streaming to you. Probably the most important thing is, if you have a soundbar or an AVR, set your TV for bitstream pass-through. Chances are that's going to give you a better playback experience because the end device knows more about the playback environment than your source device like a TV or DMA does. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Richard Friedel, who's going to talk about our overall recommendations.
Thank you, Robert. I just want to take a quick second before I start with this and just say what an incredible experience it was to work on this committee. Our presenters here and the other people were just amazing. And the amount of knowledge that was shared, you should absolutely read the paper if you have any interest in this topic at all. And I guarantee you, if you read it, you'll learn something. So there you go, my little pitch for our work. And now I really have the easy part because I get to tell you what everybody else just told you only with our recommendations. So first, our first recommendation is use dialogue-based loudness anchors. It's sort of pretty intuitive, I would say. You know, intelligibility is all about understanding dialogue, but people are not necessarily using dialogue-based anchors when they're doing loudness measurements and when they're getting ready to prepare stuff for distribution. Now, that's not so true in the broadcasting and MVBT space because we're used to ATSC 85 and the COM Act, but other newer distribution forms may or may not be used to that and are using full program mix. And our experience has shown that use of a dialogue as an anchor is a really effective means of ensuring dialogue intelligibility. And I can tell you from my experience at Fox, with all our long form programming was processed this way, and it did make a difference considering how shows are produced today, as Scott talked about earlier. Secondly, Robert just mentioned this, the vast number of viewers are listening in stereo. So we feel it's important to prioritize stereo and downmix intelligibility. That the number of viewers in stereo is huge. The number listening to speakers that are contained in the sets is also very large. And that provides a challenge, as Robert said. So whether that stereo mix is derived in distribution, as Robert was hoping a distributor might provide, or far more likely, it's done in the consumer home device. So look, we're not suggesting you don't create multi-channel mixes. What we're suggesting is you give equal priority to the intelligibility when you're mixing and doing QC, right? You absolutely will find, in my experience, that if you optimize for stereo intelligibility, it generally impacts all formats. And the reverse of that is not necessarily true. So we understand that takes some additional time. You know, it's another pass maybe for listening, but that's one of the really strong recommendations we got from our mixing contributors. Next is the cost use of dynamic processing. The other Scott mentioned this one, and about buildup as processing and things are impacted as things are concatenated downstream. These things can easily impact intelligibility when that happens. And it causes listener fatigue, and that in and of itself, because of processing, may contribute to intelligibility problems, but it can actually impair the intelligibility. So it's really important that upstream people recognize that downstream people are processing as well. And on top of that, you have the challenge of, during that distribution, it's almost always automated QC systems, and they're completely unattended facilities, right? So that means there's actually nobody there to hear what the impact is. So the only way you find out, of course, is consumer complaints. Not an ideal situation, I'd have to say. Next situation was, as Robert was just talking, try to mix for the consumer listing environment, or recognizing that. And recognizing that is a compromise, but depending upon who your audience is, it's something to significantly take into account. It is pretty straightforward. Obviously, the listeners listen at lower listening levels than in a professional mixing environment. They don't use professional speakers. So one of our recommendations is, if you have to, do a second pass. Actually, I used to do this in my days, using lesser quality speakers at lower levels. I used to use Oratones. I don't even know if they make those anymore, but that's our suggestion. So during QC, emulate the consumer environment, and that does include, as I think Robert mentioned, try to add some background noise if you can, maybe a little change the reverberation, because that will help you understand intelligibility, or the impact it has on intelligibility. We also encourage consumers to experiment and upgrade. So the first important part is, of course, we're all consumers. We may be professionals, but we're consumers too. So we actually encourage you to go home and play with the processing and DRC settings and things on the equipment that you have. It's important for you to be comfortable with how these things work, and then evangelize that to your coworkers and friends and family, so that they can learn and understand the impact of these devices. The selections can be complicated and confusing, unfortunately, because we're always trying to give people more options. But in understanding how they impact the listening experience is really important, and we think we're really recommending that professionals do this so that you can better communicate to the people you work with and to your audience. And then the greatest impact you can have an intelligibility in a home environment. If you don't have one, add an external center channel speaker, or soundbar, obviously. And remember Robert's caution that low-cost soundbars don't often have a center channel speaker. They just have left and right speakers. But a center channel speaker makes a huge difference in the home environment. And lastly, foster a culture of intelligibility. Look, everyone here needs to become an evangelist for intelligibility. It's clearly a huge problem, as Jim described in the beginning. So you need to, work with the people that you're producing with, or just distributing to. Prioritize intelligibility with anybody who can make a decision, so that maybe it gets a little more priority, right? Use your influence for things like cinematic experiences, as Scott was mentioning. Look, everybody loves to make movies and things like that, but if it's intended for a mobile device, you really don't want that cinematic experience, and that sometimes needs to be explained to producers, right? Also, as brought up by a number of the mixing folks, they feel like they have less and less resources these days, like everybody. But adding resources, especially when you're capturing the sound, that's really important, because, of course, if you get a really poorly recorded session, it's really hard to improve the intelligibility. And key factor, ideally, you absolutely want somebody not familiar with the production to help you QC for intelligibility. We all have this bias. You learn, you understand the words. This is a really important aspect, and maybe the most important thing you can do in a mixed environment. All of us have to work together in order to solve the intelligibility problem. It's a very complex environment, as Scott mentioned in the beginning, and it's something for all of us to do. And one last thought, consumers don't really want to reach for a volume control or hold the volume control, right, while they're watching programming. It distracts from their enjoyment of the content, which is certainly not what any of us are trying to do. So at Fox, we had an interesting philosophy, at least I think it's interesting. We would tell the operators and the people, how long does it take for somebody to reach for a remote control? And we'd say, that's how long you have to fix whatever's broken, right? Whether it's an audio problem, a video problem, transmission problem, whatever, because when they pick up their remote control, it's got two buttons that are really similar. One's labeled volume and one's labeled channel. And it's really easy for them to hit the channel one instead of the volume one. So let's not give them that opportunity. And that certainly applies to dialogue intelligibility, right? So there you go. Thank you so much. And I think we have some time left. We're happy to take questions.
I want to remind everybody that they should put their questions in the chat. And also, I also want to point out that this paper was put together with the rules of consensus. So everything was introduced and discussed, and the whole committee came to an agreement on how everything was worded and so forth. So you can really get a really good understanding of the situation, and there's very little opinion in the paper. Any questions? Please put them in the chat. Otherwise, I also want to thank the committee, and I also want to thank New York AES and New York SBE. And Edwin Bucant is asking, how do the loudness rules affect this? And Jim, I'll let you answer that one.
Sure. So what we found, and you'll be able to read this in the paper, is if the loudness rules are applied correctly, and in the United States, the loudness rules say that programs should be measured and identified as dialogue, right? So the dialogue should be measured. And for for programs and for short form content, full program mix should be used. So on a program, if dialogue is measured, it's usual that everything will come across with good intelligibility if the mix was done properly. If for some reason full program mix was used to normalize the content downstream somewhere, that becomes a problem, because then there's an opportunity in using the algorithm that adjusts where the loudness is at for the dialogue to be pushed down based on the amplitude or the lack of some amplitude of the remaining elements of the mix. So the loudness rules kind of work in harmony with the whole topic. And one of the things that we tried to impress upon everybody in the paper is adherence to correct use of the loudness rules is really important for things to work correctly.
Thank you, Jim. Nathan Reichman is writing, if the committee could wave a magic wand and change one thing in the entire chain, what would it be? And we cannot say the talent. Robert?
Yeah, so I'll at least offer a first answer to that. If we really truly did have the magic wand, that would be to replace everybody's TV set speakers with real speakers.
Yeah.
With a real center channel speaker would be great. So we should have every consumer buy a sound bar or step up to an AVR system with a center channel speaker, because the speakers that are in TVs have been
abysmal.
Well,
subpar.
They've lost their influence in the product design process, and have been overwhelmed by the desire for that millimeter thick bezel around the edge of the TV screen and the thickness of the TV. So they are a shadow of their former self, and thus soundbar is the best thing we can do. Maybe you can get a tax credit for buying a soundbar.
There you go.
That'd be our thing.
Yeah, and there was that other tidbit that had come up in our discussions. People really buy TVs on size and cost. They don't buy TVs on the quality of the sound, and that's why we thought it was really important to identify you really need an add-on piece of audio equipment to improve the sound experience when you're watching TV.
I like that for the first dream and the magic. But if we're in the realm of magic, then I would also throw in an on-set culture of intelligibility where everyone values dialogue intelligibility from the actors and the performance and the recording, and a quiet set as much as they value amazing cameras and great picture and beautiful lighting and sets. Because sound has always been kind of a companion to that picture journey in post-production. And then secondly, I would magically, somehow, this is not possible, but have mixers mixing in a living room environment, not in a quiet NC50 theatrical sounding stage.
I second all those, Scott. Those were my choices.
I want to also remind the audience that if you're going to the NAB convention, at the SBE workshop, NS workshop, we'll be having a discussion of dialogue intelligibility and loudness together on Tuesday of the convention. So please come by. Any other questions coming up into the chat, please? We got a thumbs up. Okay. I think that's it. I want to thank the AES New York section and SBE Chapter 15, and remind everyone that next week's meeting is going to be on Thursday. Bud, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So first off, guys, this was great. Very, very good information, and coupled with the SBE meeting we had a few months ago, talking about loudness. This, I think, is just dovetails very, very nicely with that. Next week, SBE 15 is focused on FM, and we are going to talk about SFNs, single frequency networks, basically using FM boosters to improve coverage of stations. It's proven, it works. It is in play, as an example, in San Francisco, where the stations that have embraced this technology properly have had an increase in revenue and ratings. I should say the ratings have gone up, and therefore the revenue has gone up. So this will be a very, very relevant topic. You'll see more coming up on FM boosters. You may have seen this with geo broadcast systems. Bert Goldman is going to be our presenter, and he knows this inside and out. And the geo team has been very good on putting this technology together. But Bert's going to lay it out so that anybody that thinks there's an improvement for their station, this could be the beginning. This could be something you take back to management and say, hey, we may want to consider this, and then get the ball rolling to see if it works. Because there are a number of processes. This is not just throwing up a booster. This is synchronizing them. This is finding out where to put it, the best place to put it, finding a tower. Bert's going to go through the process. It's detailed, but once you do it right, it works. It's just like what we're doing here with making audio intelligible. So this is great. We hope to see you. If you're on the SBE 15 mailing list, you will receive information on that meeting shortly, within the next day or two. And it will also be posted on sbe15.com. So, and it's a pleasure to work with AES New York section here for this meeting. Thanks, David and Rowie and everybody here. Jim, this has been a very, very good experience.
I'll just
if anyone wants to join the technical committee for broadcast and online delivery, send an email to broadcast@aes.org, and we'll add you to the list. Don't know when the next project will be or what it will be, but it's always fun. It's always interesting. And these papers are how I spent my time during COVID. So that's that. So thank you, guys.
I'll just jump in here real quick. As the co-chair of AES New York, I want to thank our prestigious panel. That was really informative, great presentation. You guys have done it before, so you're getting polished at it each time you do it. And I want to definitely thank Bud and the SBE. It was a great to partner up with you on this event, as we have done in the past. We will do it again on some of our upcoming events for AES New York, including a partnership with the Recording Academy surrounding the new show being put together by famous legendary engineer producers Tom Dowd, Joel Dorn, and Arif Martin. Their two sons and daughter of each, respectively, have put together a wonderful show, and we'll be doing a presentation about that a little later in the year. We're also partnering with the AES San Francisco on a very nice Dolby presentation, and that will be at the Dolby Theater. So keep an eye out for that. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Just a little side note, we did have a technical problem with our Facebook. However, we will be doing some post-production on the Zoom videos and posting that shortly, probably by tomorrow or the next day. And thanks everybody for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you all. Thanks for joining.